Now, we're going to go on to our power rule number 3. What is this one? Yes, ma'am.
Kind and caring kid.
A kind and caring kid. I have a story for you. It's called Johnny Dare. We're going to have it in 2 parts. See if you can hear anything in the story. Number 1, the first part, about being a responsible student reporter. Okay? We'll listen to that. Listen for that in this first segment. Johnny was the new kid in school. He wanted to be in with a popular group of guys and gals. And so he ended up doing anything that they asked him to do. In fact, he got to be known as Johnny Dare because he did all the dares. They were silly things. Things like putting ketchup on ice cream and then eating it. Didn't hurt him or anybody else, but it did make him feel like one of the guys. He told his dad about these things. And his dad had told him, you know, dares really are not the wisest things to do. But silly's just silly. I want you to think, Johnny. That's what his dad said. I want you to think first before you ever take a dare. Number 1, if you don't want to do it, then don't. Number 2, and probably the most important thing, is if the dare might hurt somebody, might hurt you, or damage property, do you do it? No. You refuse to do it. Sometimes the pressure is so great that you think your friends might not like you if you don't do the dare. But just remember to think first. And you can say that you have to check first with me before you do anything. An easy way to remember, he said, was no, go, tell. The next day at school, Johnny and his friends were walking through the park that was just right across from the school. And they saw in the grass right next to the trash can a gun, or at least it looked like a gun. But they didn't know. So they were looking at this gun, and one of them said, Johnny, dare you to pick it up. What Johnny thought, he remembered what his dad said. If it might hurt somebody, then don't do it. And he figured, if this was a real gun, could that hurt somebody? Yeah, that's right. And so he refused. It was really hard for him to refuse to do it because he didn't know if his friends would still like him. But he did it anyway. He left. He went back to his house, and he told his dad. Well, his dad then reported it to the sheriff's office, and they sent out a deputy, and the deputy went over to the park, and he found the gun. After he found the gun, he went over to Johnny's house, and he talked to Johnny, and he said, I am so proud of you because you were a responsible student reporter. You saw the danger there. You were smart enough not to take that dare, and you may have saved some other person from picking up the gun and maybe having it go off accidentally. And he called Johnny a star. So did you hear anything about a responsible student reporter in this one? Yes, sir.
Him not taking the dare to pick up the gun?
Yeah, I mean, that was pretty smart, wasn't it? Yeah. That was really smart. What's another one? Mr. Redshirt?
And then he went home and told his dad, and then his dad called the sheriff's department.
Exactly. That's pretty awesome. He was being like a responsible citizen too, right? He was being like a responsible citizen. Now in part 2 of this story, we're going to be talking about a kind and caring kid and respect. So listen to the second part of Johnny Dare's story. This part was written by Cheryl Forshee. And let's see what you hear, okay? The next day at school, Johnny went back to class, and he was worried that his friends wouldn't like him anymore because he didn't take the dare about picking up the gun. But everything seemed to be okay. He was ready at recess. Recess was his favorite time of the day. He was ready at recess to go out on the playground and play their 2 favorite games. One was a game of kickball, and the second one was calling poor Sarah names. Now, Sarah wasn't like the other kids in school. She was slow and not too smart. And Johnny knew that he probably should not call her names, but he wanted to be liked by these guys so much that he joined in the fun of making Sarah cry. But deep in his heart, he knew the difference between right and wrong because he and his dad had had these talks about what was right and what was wrong. In fact, his dad's favorite saying kept playing over and over in his head, just like some old song. His dad would say, "Treat others with respect, son, the way you'd want them treating you. And remember, if you hurt another, someday someone might hurt you." Now, Johnny figured that his dad would not understand that the words that they were calling Sarah didn't really hurt her. They were only teasing. Johnny figured that Sarah almost deserved all that name calling because she never ran away and hid. And if she really wanted to be left alone, all she had to do was stay inside. But every day it was the same. Sarah came out to play. And then she'd just stand there with tears streaming down her face, too upset to run away. Then the game was over because the whole point of the game was to make Sarah cry. That next weekend, Johnny was out riding his bicycle. That was one of his favorite things to do on the weekend. He got into a bad accident, though. In fact, he was injured badly enough to where he had to miss almost 2 months of school. It was time for him to go back to school. And he was a little nervous because he hadn't seen any of his friends during that time. He hoped that nobody would notice that jagged scar on his face or his limp from his injured leg. He decided to take a deep breath, and he limped into the room. And there he saw in front of him a great big banner that said, "Welcome back, Johnny," and a bunch of red balloons. His classmates all smiled at him, and he smiled back too. Everything was okay. Recess came. As he got close to them, he expected a few pats on the back, but instead all he got were stares. And then he heard the words, "Hey, freak, where did you get that ugly mask?" The games had begun. He turned to see nobody. There wasn't anybody behind him. That's when he realized that they were calling him the freak. He knew two things. The first thing was they would never quit until they made him cry. And the second thing is if he cried, then they would just call him a wimp. So Johnny continued to laugh. But it was getting harder and harder because what he really wanted to do was cry. And a tear formed right here in the corner of his eye. But before it spilled over, someone from behind yelled out, "Hey, you bullies, leave him alone because he's a friend of mine." He turned and he saw Sarah. Sarah was standing up for him, one of her very own tormentors. She was willing to take his place so that those kids would stop calling Johnny names. And that's what happened. The kids turned on Sarah. But this time, Johnny did not join in. Finally, the kids saw how strong that Johnny was, and they decided they wanted to be like him. So now when you go by that school out on the playground at recess time, you will see a bunch of kids together, and they're all teaching their new friend Sarah how to play kickball. So our third rule is kind and caring kids with respect being a very large portion of it, okay?